Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 1 of my card review for the new Hearthstone expansion, the Boomsday Project, which was just revealed, and I'm jumping right into the first 5 cards, including 2 legendaries and a pretty crazy new mechanic we have to talk about. So as always is the case with all of my card reviews, up first I'm going to do some detailed reviews, talk about all of these cards at great length, explore how they're going to work, talk about why I think they may or may not work, so on and so forth. And if you don't have a lot of time and that sounds like a little too much of a burden for you and you just want to see the card reveals, of course you can skip to the end of the video using the link in the description, jumping right to my quick reviews where I simply go through each card very quickly and award it a score from 1 to 5 stars. Now that said, now that you know what's up, let's go ahead and jump into this crazy exciting Boomsday Project card review. So up first here we have a new legendary spell, and we really haven't had legendary spells in Hearthstone. Technically with quests, quests were legendary spells, they had a legendary gem, they were spells sort of, but they were their own sort of unique special case where they were always in your opening hand, always 1 mana. So this is the first real legendary spell, let's say, and it's for Rogue, and it's called Myra's Unstable Element, and it is very unstable. It is absurd and bonkers and crazy because, as you'll see here with that effect, it reads, draw the rest of your deck. And that is just mind-boggling. And your first reaction is probably, well, why on earth would you ever want to do that? If you play that on turn 5, you're just going to burn like 20 cards and you're going to put yourself into fatigue instantly. And yes, there are some definite downsides to playing this in certain scenarios. If you play it too soon, clearly you're just going to kill yourself very quickly via fatigue and you're going to burn 1,000,000 cards, which doesn't sound very appealing or appetizing. But there are, of course, scenarios where Myra's Unstable Element looks really, really good. Say you're down to your last card and you have 10 cards remaining in your deck. You could draw 10 cards for 5 mana. You would still accelerate your fatigue count, but if your deck is built in a specific way that really desperately needs cards or is trying to find some very specific combo piece, that Shutterwalk style thing where you just need your Shutterwalk and you have to desperately draw it. Now, obviously, Shutterwalk not available to Rogue, but those sorts of cards and opportunities do exist in Hearthstone, so Myra's Unstable Element could certainly be some kind of way to make an in-game state where you're going to find the thing that you need no matter what if your card is built around all kinds of card draw. Now, even beyond that, I think that in some way this could be an almost Divine Favor style card for a hyper-aggressive deck. Maybe even something like Odd Rogue, where you're just out of cards and you're trying to make that last push as an aggressive deck to kill your opponent, but you don't have resources. And suddenly this could draw you like 8 or 9 cards. And you don't care about fatigue because you're trying to end the game anyway. It's not a really important thing. You just need resources right now to try to find that damage, so you pull this into a couple deadly poisons or cold bloods or whatever else to kill your opponent on the spot. So I think there's kind of a combo build around craziness opportunity for this card, but also perhaps just an aggro possibility. Now, I don't think every Rogue deck ever is going to use this. There might not even be one that finds a home for this right away, but it's one of those cards that just has such a powerful effect. And that effect is designed in such a narrow direction that it's going to accomplish something desirable at some point for some deck that I think it will eventually find play. Who knows when that's going to happen? Not a 5-star card by any means in my mind, because it's just not good enough to see everyday play across all Rogue decks, but one of those utility cards that is good enough to surprise some people and do something crazy and somehow find a home in some weird deck. So I'm really excited to see how this one's utilized, and I can't wait for somebody to just burn 1,000,000 cards against me with this thing. It's gonna be a lot of fun, and I really can't wait to see the other legendary spells we're presumably going to get for the other 8 classes. So up next here, let's talk about another legendary, but this time it's a minion for Shaman. It's Electra Stormsurge. It's a 3-mana 3/3 elemental, and the battle cry reads, your next spell this turn casts twice. So, pretty cool little card here, I think. First off, of course, 3 mana 3/3 is a totally reasonable stat line. You're not sacrificing too much in the way of stats for what appears to me to be a pretty darn powerful effect, because you get to double up on your spells. The first thing that comes to mind for a card like this is Bloodlust for me. You could build a pretty aggressive token-based elemental deck with all the little fireflies and all the little garbage elemental minions and totems and stuff that Shaman loves to do. And then on, say, like turn 8, if you're looking for a big finisher, you could give all of your minions +6 attack, because your Bloodlust would cast itself twice. So even with only like 1 or 2 minions on board, it would be this insane damage burst opportunity. With just a couple totems, you could do like 12 damage, for instance, thanks to Electra Stormsurge. So that's a really quick, easy opportunity for this card. But as you look farther than that in Shaman, there are just a lot of spells that could be amazing when cast twice. Just think about things like Healing Rain, for instance. If you want to put it in a more defensive shell, suddenly you could cast Healing Rain twice and heal for 24 health thanks to Electra Stormsurge. So essentially, whatever mana cost or effect you're looking to get doubled, Electra Stormsurge is like a 3 mana version of that. So it's like a Healing Rain for 3 mana. It's a Bloodlust for 3 mana. It's I'm looking at a list of Shaman cards right now. It's a Lightning Bolt for 3 mana. Maybe that's not quite as exciting. A Lava Burst for 3 mana. A Volcano for 3 mana, although that one seems particularly risky. That sounds scary. And Farsight, right? You get 2 Farsights, 2 Lightning Storms, all kinds of cool 2 Feral Spirits. That sounds cool too. All kinds of cool opportunities with this card, but you also get the 3/3 body attached. So it's not like you're really spending 3 mana. It's almost like it's free, because you're getting a nice little minion development along the way as well. So clearly in elemental decks, this is a neat opportunity, but I think it goes beyond that as just a cool little utility card. Toss it into a lot of different decks. Doesn't have to rely on elemental synergy. It does its thing anyway. And suddenly you're getting double value out of your spells. You combine it with Hagatha, you get a free spell on top of that. So I think the opportunity for this card looks really, really promising, because you're not sacrificing much and you're gaining a lot in return. So I'm excited to see this one. I'm almost certain some deck somewhere is going to find a home for this card. It's just free and good in what it accomplishes, so there's really no downside to running this guy. So up next here we have a new hunter card, the Spider Bomb, and this introduces a new mechanic, a new keyword into Hearthstone, which is magnetic. And what magnetic means, essentially there are going to be some new mech cards introduced that have this magnetic keyword, and they have this dual purpose that you can utilize. So you can play this card as a minion. Alternatively, you can essentially play it as a buff where you attach the card to a mech that's already in play. So if you have another mech, you can almost use Spider Bomb like a buff, where you give the mech in play 2/2 in stats, because your Spider Bomb is a 2/2, but you also give it a Death Rattle, destroy a random enemy minion. So in a way, you can put the card into play immediately, and you know, if your minion already has initiative on board, you can attack with it, surprise your opponent with the Death Rattle, surprise them with the additional 2/2 in stats, and that's pretty exciting. And that seems really powerful. A 3 mana 2/2 buff is not like the most amazing thing in the world, but with that Death Rattle on top of it, that's pretty darn cool. Now, the downside there, of course, you do need to have mechs in play, and you need a deck that has a lot of mech synergies. And as we know right now in standard format, there's just not that many mechs available. Of course, in wild format, if you go back to Goblins versus Gnomes, there's tons, and this could certainly fit into a mech deck in wild immediately. In standard, I think it's going to be a little bit harder to pull that off. Now, there may be a lot of mechs released in this expansion. We don't know. That's going to impact how much viability this card has. I'm not going to judge it based on its limitations there. I'm going to look at it in an ideal scenario, and, you know, if it works, how well does it work? And I think it's pretty good. That's a nice effect, reasonable stat. We have a lot of other cards in Hearthstone with things like the Unidentified Elixir for Priest. That's a 3 mana 2/2 buff that seems pretty powerful when it's combined with a nice effect, and this has that nice effect alongside it. So I like that aspect a lot, being able to use this as a magnetic minion or a magnetic buff upgrade to your minions, putting those stats into effect right away. That's always been a good thing in Hearthstone. Initiative and Surprise are both very powerful elements when controlling the board. Now, as a minion itself, I think it's also halfway decent, right? A 2/2 for 3, not an exciting stat line by any means, but this Death Rattle is just a very high friction sort of play. It can cause a lot of problems for your opponent, where they have to do things in a weird way to make sure they don't risk losing powerful stuff. It has utility as an early to mid game card, but also gets better in the late game as well when there's bigger stuff out there to play, because it's just more likely to kill a giant thing. Of course, Hunter has ways to activate Death Rattles themselves with things like Play Dead. So if your opponent plays a Lich King, you could slam a Spider Bomb, Play Dead it, and kill the opponent's Lich King as a removal in a pinch, almost like a voodoo doll of sorts, with a little bit more cost, of course. But it has different angles in which it can affect the game, both immediately via the magnetic aspect, but as a minion, also just as a combo piece in certain kinds of decks. So I think the potential for this card's pretty strong. I like a lot of aspects of it. It does some cool stuff well. Now, that said, it's going to have to fit into a deck. It's going to need some sort of mech environment to really shine, so there might be some limitations there. That might mean this card never sees play just because it doesn't find the right home, or that deck isn't good enough. I don't think that makes it a fundamentally bad card. I think it has some real raw strengths and aspects of it that are good, that are generally the kinds of things we like to see in Hearthstone. So I'm fairly high on this card. It's not amazing, but I think pretty strong. So up next here, I have a neutral minion called the Omega Defender. And in this case, Omega is not really a keyword, I guess, but at least it's a mechanic or theme they're introducing with the Boomsday Project. And Omega cards are cards in which they get an extra effect or buff or upgrade of some sort if you have 10 mana crystals. So they're apparently going to be average or below average cards at their base cost, but if you play them late in the game, when you get to that 10 mana spot, they do something crazy. They get a huge buff, as you'll see here with Omega Defender. It starts out as a 4 mana 2/6, pretty underwhelming stat line. It does have taunt, which is nice. So it's, it's that Stegadon type card, right? It's not going to see play because of that. That's just not good enough in Hearthstone, not competitive enough. But if you get to 10 mana, so if you manage to hold this thing until the late game, suddenly it gains 10 attack when you play it from hand via its battle cry. So it becomes a 12/6 minion for 4 mana. And if you thought 4 mana 7/7 memes were crazy, or 4 mana 8/8s with Mountain Giant, suddenly now we have a 4 mana 12/6. And that is absurd. And what I like about this mechanic, or these Omega cards, or the idea of this, is that cards are okay early. You can play them. This is a nice defensive card. If you get desperate, it could shut out, an aggressive deck or a token style board. But it serves double utility in the late game. So if you're playing against a control deck and a 4 mana 2/6 just isn't going to do enough, you can create this really cool threat near the end of the game. And that said, a 12/6 is still not the most crazy, strong, intimidating thing in Hearthstone. At turn 10, opponents have removal. It's 6 health. It still dies to trades pretty easily. Just a couple 3/3s will kill this thing. So it's still got pretty limited impact, I think, even as a 12/6. In constructed format and arena, this thing's absolutely bonkers, I think, as will probably all Omega cards be, but this one in particular just looks insane in arena. Now, as far as constructed is concerned, I still don't think as a 12/6 for 4 mana, you feel all that great about playing it, because at turn 10, again, it's just not going to be able to survive to that many things. It's probably not going to attack all that often. If it does, it's going to attack into taunts. Your opponent's going to heal through the damage and swing you harder the other way. It's just not a huge value piece. It's not changing the board state immediately when it's played. It doesn't do any of the things that we expect a really good control style card to do. It's not even as good, I'd say, as like something like Mountain Giant, because that 8 health is probably more important than the additional attack from something like Omega Defender. So I don't really anticipate this seeing a whole lot of constructed Hearthstone play. Now, that said, in a deck like Druid with lots of ramp, it becomes more interesting because they can get to 10 mana so much faster that there might be some sort of aggressive ramp-based Druid deck, which doesn't sound necessarily like they go together. But if a Druid can get to 10 mana, by turn 5 or 6 and play an Omega Defender along with a couple other things, then you're going to be talking about some exciting, crazy opportunities, right? It's that sort of Spiteful Summoner style board where they play a giant set of stuff earlier than they're supposed to, and if the opponent can't answer it, they're just going to hit for 12 with Omega Defender. So there's a little bit of opportunity, I think, for this card in that specific scenario. I'm not sure other classes would be able to utilize it as well, but that's one way this thing could make an impact. So I'm going to give it a slightly better score than I otherwise probably would, just because of the ramp that's available to Druid. But otherwise, I think a limited card that's just going to be difficult to make it work, and I don't think any deck's really going to feel like they need this thing. It seems like it's going to be a tough fit for most classes, most archetypes, and most decks. And then finally here I have one last card. Speaking of Druid ramp, here we are with Biology Project, and projects are another new card type essentially being introduced in the Boomsday Project. And these projects essentially are cards that apparently impact both players the same. They have symmetrical effects. Now, we don't know if they're all going to be spells or minions necessarily. I don't think that was confirmed. But with Biology Project, as you can see, each player gains 2 mana crystals. You do it and your opponent does it as well. And that's going to be the theme for these cards. Now, talking specifically about this one, I think this card's actually really strong. And let's talk about why. The first thing to note here is that these are not empty mana crystals, these are mana crystals. So this doesn't work like Wild Growth, it works more like Nourish. So when you cast this, you're actually gonna, for instance, you cast this on turn 1, you're actually gonna immediately jump to 3 mana, right? Which is, first off, a lot of ramp. That's crazy. But you're going to have 2 active mana remaining. So you can actually still hero power. You can play a 2-drop. You can play a Wild Growth. So if you mulligan correctly, you can Biology Project into Wild Growth on turn 1, thereby gaining 3 empty mana crystals, which is silly. That would put you at 4 mana. When the turn comes back to you, you could play Nourish on your second turn, gaining even more mana crystals along the way. And you could get to, I guess, 8 mana the following turn on turn 3. Playing a Lich King on turn 3, or playing an Ultimate Infestation pretty soon thereafter, or maybe even that turn with a couple innervates. So very quickly your ramp can just absolutely snowball out of control with a card like Biology Project, and that is an incredibly scary prospect as far as I'm concerned. Druid already has too much ramp, they already have too much mana, and this is going to make it even easier to achieve that. Now, the one thing I haven't talked about, of course, is the symmetrical aspect. Your opponent is also gaining 2 mana crystals. So, for instance, on turn 1, you get to play this card in a 2 mana card, but on your opponent's turn 1, assuming that you go first, they would be able to play a 3 mana card right away, but also maybe coin into a 4 mana card. So there's certainly a little bit of downside here. You're giving your opponent the opportunity to utilize slightly more of these mana crystals a little bit faster than yourself, because they didn't pay the 1 mana penalty to cast the Biology Project. Of course, also, you're accelerating their ramp at the same time. So they're going to be able to play 5-drop, 6-drop, 7-drop sooner as well. Now, that said, I don't necessarily think that downside's as bad as it seems, because presumably you're going to build a deck for Biology Project that is very beneficial from having tons of ramp. So you're going to have lots of late game cards, lots of big, crazy, scary threats. Your opponent is not necessarily as likely to have a deck that benefits as much from the ramp. So for instance, if you're playing an aggro opponent, they may just not have big enough cards. They may have mulliganed for a 1 or 2 drop to start the game, and you're putting them at 3 mana, so their mulligan feels a little weird. They don't get to play as efficiently. I mean, clearly they could still dump multiple 1-drops, but maybe it creates a little bit of friction, or something went wrong, or they have to rely more on hero power than they anticipated, and their hand empties super fast because they're playing a ton of 1-drops, etc., etc. So you basically disrupt their plans a little bit, you give them opportunity, but they may not be able to capitalize on that opportunity as much as your deck can, because they don't have big enough stuff. They run out of cards, they run out of threats, and you start to outpace them really, really quickly using your own ramp. So clearly a downside, and maybe that's enough to hold this card back, but I don't think it will be. I think that you're going to gain so much more from this that it's worth it to give your opponent a little bit in return. Now, we have seen symmetrical ramp before with the, gosh, I can't think of the name of the card. It's a Dryad. I think it was from maybe the Grand Tournament It was the 3-mana 2/4 that either drew both opponents a card, or both players a card, or ramped both players by 1 mana. That's all just a little tiny bit of fringe play. I think this card's better because it's cheaper, and you can cast it on turn 1 and set up some crazy ramp opportunities with that Biology Project Wild Growth Nourish line that is possible and scary good. So I think this card's really, really strong, and it frightens me a little bit at what it can do. I guess we'll have to see it in practice if the downside of the symmetrical aspect keeps it in check. I hope it does, frankly. I hope that that's not going to allow this card to run free and instead punish the Druid when they try to use it. That's the best case scenario for this, but I do think this is a very strong card. And there you go, guys. That's it for my detailed reviews here for part 1 of my Boomsday Project card reviews. For some reason, Boomsday Project's really hard to say, I feel like. Anyway, now we're going to jump into the quick reviews where I rate each of these cards from 1 to 5 stars. Myra's Unstable Element is a 3-star card. Electra Stormsurge is a 5-star card. Spider Bomb is a 4-star card. Omega Defender is a 2-star card. Biology Project is a 4-star card. And there you go, guys. I can't believe it's already time to talk about new cards. So many reviews are coming. Lots of new cards are coming. It's a great time to be a Hearthstone fan, as always. Can't wait to walk through all these with you. But for now, of course, share your thoughts, share your reactions. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm right. I want to hear all of that in the comments below. What did I miss? What combos are there? You guys are always so good at adding so much extra detail to all of these cards and opening up my mind for opportunities and possibilities. So I can't wait to read what you have to say. But of course, for me to read it, you have to say it. So leave those comments. But until then, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.